we've got none other than biologist and author Marc Bekoff. How you doing today, Marc?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you. No complaints at all.
Well, I really appreciate you being here. So you've written a wheelbarrow full of books. How many books have you written in your day?
I'm not sure. I always say that I edited a bunch. So I think I say I published 31 or 32, but if you count multi-volume encyclopedias, you can add 10. and they were a lot of work. People go, oh, you just edit them. No, editing means you actually have to read what comes in and edit it. And one of them is almost 1 million words, but
Whoa.
Give or take, 30 to 40, depending on how you count. In academics, of course, you want to count everything, but I don't really care.
Right. Count the periods and question marks, yeah.
Count the periods and question marks, yeah.
But the topic normally is you've been really a great advocate for animals. You talk about animal behavior. You talk about everything related to sort of the natural world. What got you started? I know we talked before, but what got you started in that sort of empathy for animals and your trajectory in life? How'd you get started?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, when I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in an apartment, small place. I shared a bedroom with my sister, one of my sisters, and I would go outside and talk to the dogs and the cats and the birds and the ants and the mice if I saw a mouse. And I had my requisite goldfish, my family did, on the kitchen counter, and I would talk to the goldfish. And my folks never laughed at me. They thought, whatever they thought it was fine. And my mom was a very empathic woman. And I think, I think that was part of the equation. And about 21 years ago, and it's scary to think it was that long ago, I published a book called Minding Animals. And that came from a conversation that I had with my folks that I was minding animals since the time I was a kid. I was attributing minds to them and minding them in terms of giving them, taking care of them and caring about their well-being. So, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I know for some people it sounds weird, but I think it was in my genes, and I could always feel the emotions of the animals, the pain, the joy, whatever it was they were feeling, I could actually feel. So it seemed natural for me to do what I'm doing. And I think most people who knew me back then or knew me over the early years would agree.
Did you ever have an issue? Because, the animals are of varying degrees of cuteness in some ways. But, an earthworm has personality, does it not? I mean...
Oh, sure. I mean, I would see individual differences. Yeah, I remember... I mean, I don't remember them explicitly, but I can remember maybe saying to my father, wow, like this earthworm here, if I reach down to touch the earthworm, it moves away, but this other one doesn't. So I think just by carefully observing animals, you see those individual differences, even in their emotions when they're very young, very small, very young.
Yeah. What's amazing is they say no matter how much we study animals, we always find out that they're smarter than we thought, not dumber. And I think that's becoming true, more true all the time. So you're a big dog guy, too. Like you're working on a book about dogs, are you not?
Oh, I just had this book be published called Dog Demystified.
Very cool.
And it's basically... it's laid out like an encyclopedia from A to Z. So you can go in and it's short entries for pretty much you name the topic and there's short entries. And people really like it because I wrote it so that everybody could read it. I didn't, get it all muddied up with scientific jargon that no one understands.
Yeah.
And so that's my latest dog book. And all the references are on my homepage, marcbekoff.com. So you can actually read it, have your computer open or your phone and highlight a title or a web address. And while you're reading, you could actually, while you're reading the hard book, but you could do it actually, on an ebook, you can actually have the references there to look at and access. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm going to check that out. I'll put a link to that in the description when we're done here. So what was your experience with dogs? I mean, obviously at some point you had a dog in your life, and what was that like?
Well, I never had a dog when I was growing up, or actually till I lived on my own, because my mom had been bitten by a dog and she was afraid of them. She didn't hate them. But I always was, I mean, like anybody, maybe not anybody, but like many people, I was really attracted to dogs and cats because they're the animals you would see the most. But I would also love to look at mice and rats out in the wild, frogs, and different types of birds. And I felt most at home. My folks said it, being outside watching animals, or watching trees, talking to trees, or something, just because I liked being outside, and I thought it really important to connect with nature.
Yeah.
Whatever and whoever you have around, you really want to acknowledge, their existence.
Absolutely. And so did you get to travel a lot with your work and throughout your career?
Oh yeah, far too much. I'm a million plus miler.
Really?
Like with United Airlines alone. Yeah. Yeah, there were years I was flying 100 to 120,000 miles a year.
But
Many trips to Europe and China and Australia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so when you go in a new place, you being such an avid, birder and animal lover, do you notice some of the wildlife other places, and what's some of the most notable sort of wildlife you can remember while you were traveling?
Well, yeah, I mean, as long as you could get out. Like I gave some lectures in Sweden some years ago at the it was called the Crane Seminar, and it's because it was a time when cranes were migrating through Sweden, different parts of Sweden. And at one point, there probably were 100,000 cranes in a field, and then they would migrate. And it was pretty cool to see this massive field, massive, filled with cranes. And then 10 days later, so there'd be very few. So it was just fun to think that this little town, it was near a little town called Skara, that you could actually see nature working, that they were migrating through and then taking off. And I got to do field work in Antarctica some years ago many decades ago, before there was any tourism.
Right.
So we spent time at a Navy base called McMurdo, and I'm sure the Air Force was there too. And then we took a helicopter to a field site called Cape Crozier, and there were 4 of us living in I guess it would have been a 10 by 16 hut, bunk beds, an outhouse, the loo, and that was really fun too. I mean, it was scary sometimes. It was really challenging because we were there in the summer, but it was still cold. But it was almost 24 hours of sunlight.
Wow.
But yeah, when I would travel, I'd always like to go on hikes or have animals who didn't live here or where I was living in the States, and I spent a good deal of time in East Africa and Kenya and Tanzania.
Oh, wow.
So I could see cougars and mountain lions here, and I could see African lions and cheetah there.
Wow. Yeah. Proper safari.
Yeah, exactly.
Holy smokes. I would think in Antarctica is there penguins or what's down there? There's not much else, right?
Penguins.
That's it.
There's lots of different birds. There's a large number of seagull species.
Uh-huh.
And of course, there are fishes, and in the water there were killer whales and leopard seals, for example, who would eat the penguins.
Right. Right.
And so, I could on any given day go down and see killer whales or orcas swimming around right in the water out in front of me.
You've been hanging out with everybody from killer whales to Elton John in Chicago.
Yeah, right.
We were just talking before about how you live in Netherlands, up in the heyday of all that great alternative culture, and of course the studio up there. And so not only are you animal lover, but you're in the music scene as well. I actually just love that. So I wanted to ask you about your book, Rewilding Our Hearts. Can you talk about what inspired you to write this, and sort of how did it turn out? What can people take away from this?
Yeah, I mean, the main reason I wrote it was to share my own personal connections with other animals and their homes, share my connections with different ecosystems, if you will. And also to send the message that, we don't need to wait for other people to enhance our appreciation of simply where we live. It could be walking out of your house in Brooklyn, New York, or New York City, or in the wilds of Oregon or Australia. And I felt that more and more people were getting alienated from nature, which is true. I mean, if you ask psychologists in different locales, they'll tell you that a lot of people, more and more people they see, are not really connected to the outdoors. So it was a fun book to write by looking at examples of people who just decide, I can't hack the city life, or, I really want more country, if you will.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like a handbook of rewilding or reconnecting with different forms of nature.
So we're in a great crisis right now. How has that changed since you've written the book? And how do you stay calm in such a kind of backwards world? I mean, from my perspective, it seems very, hard sometimes.
Well, it is hard, but I'm lucky because I lived in the mountains outside of Boulder for years, although I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I spent a few years in New York City in the grad program. And once again, getting back to Rewilding Our Hearts, I just found that when I connect with the outdoors, I feel better. I mean, that's like a bumper sticker now, but not for everybody. And I understand that there's a lot of people who, no matter how much time they spend outdoors, they don't really feel closely connected to the outdoors, for whatever reason. But, I always thought it was pretty easy to do, other than to, beside having, if you want to join a group, or, beside having to go buy the clothes to go out, and you don't really need high-end fancy clothes to go out and enjoy yourself out in nature. I always felt that the more connection people had as individuals, the closer and more, the stronger the bonds would be with the outdoors. And other animals, trees, plants, bodies of water, the air itself need that kind of connection and commitment. Because I'm a card-carrying optimist, but we're in a very difficult period.
Well, that's why I called you, Mark, because I need you right now. I'm starting to turn into a card-carrying pessimist.
Yep, it's easy. I mean, it's easy to do. I mean, there's so much stuff going on, and watching the news or reading newspapers.
Sure.
Or simply being aware. You don't have to read news. I mean, you can listen to people talk. And I'm not a news watcher, but I noticed people were getting more alienated from the outdoors. And that's a death sentence to the animals out there.
Yeah.
Because people won't even They won't see them, like prairie dogs here or other social living mammals or birds even. They won't see them for who they are. And, they'll say they're not smart, which doesn't matter to me, but they're not emotional, they're not sentient, which of course they are. And that leads into different discussions, but the fact is these animals are so small, they're easy to kill, when they become a pest. And some do, but in my eyes, and part of the Rewilding Our Heart theme is you've got to get over yourself and allow other organisms to live, not because of what they can do for you, their utility, but because it helps them. It helps you build a bond with these animals regardless of whether they can do anything to help you.
Yeah. There's a biodiversity edge to it as well, the idea that you're a good steward of the planet and the rest of the animals, right?
I hope so. I mean, I try to be, yeah. I do, not in a self-serving way. But you can be a model too. People, why don't you eat something, when you're choosing not to eat animals or animal products? And rather than getting nasty and haughty, I just say, well, I don't eat those. I don't eat that. I don't have that meal plan. So leave me alone. I wouldn't say that, but
to a lesser degree. Well, you've been vegan, 25 years?
I think I've been vegan, now that I was just looking it up, something like 20 or 23 years, I think.
Holy smokes.
But for the 10 years before that, or the 12 years before that, when I was a vegetarian, the only thing I would eat would be maybe a piece of cheese every now and again. I mean, I stopped eating all animal flesh, mid to late 80s. But every now and again, I'd eat something like a piece of cheese. That was my vice for years. I would eat a piece of cheese maybe twice a month. But I also wanted to be honest with people. They'd say, "Are you vegan?" So for a period of time, some years ago, I monitored the amount of animals I ate, which it would be slices of cheese. It's been ages since I've eaten any bodies of meat. And I would monitor, the calories in. So I would tell people that I'm 99% vegan. And then some young woman asked me, well, why do you have to eat the non-vegan products that you eat? And I would say, you're right. And I just stopped. And so it really consisted of occasional cheese and maybe an egg every now and again. I never really drank milk or, put cream in my coffee very much. So.
But there's luck there because it turns out that some of that stuff is terrible for you, right?
Yeah. But, on the other hand, too, there's a lot of people, vegans who are overweight. I don't mean that in a negative way.
Sure.
But yeah, I can't believe that on average, a vegetarian diet, maybe even if people need to have their egg or their piece of cheese every now and again, is healthier than a much more carnivorous or omnivorous diet. Omnivorous meaning, they eat plants and animals and pretty much anything else in between.
Yeah. And ethically, there's a lot of talk about how vegans eat bugs. Now, this isn't necessarily true, is it? It's...
maybe some do. I don't know. I mean, I cycle, and a couple of years ago, I think a fly or some insect flew into my mouth, and I'm sure I swallowed it. And I said to somebody on the ride, I guess I'm no longer vegan because I swallowed that bug, which was, all protein. But yeah, I mean, it just came naturally to me, to be honest with you. I was vegetarian for ages. And while I was vegetarian for a long, long time, on occasion I'd eat a piece of cheese.
Yeah.
When I stopped eating bodies, if you will, I really stopped. I mean, I never went back to it.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, meat's easy because it's so bizarre and so strange, isn't it? This fleshy kind of obvious. This is obviously a sentient being. This is not. Doesn't feel right. Cheese is different.
yeah, and that, well, yeah, it is. But the dairy industry is a little shop of horrors, or a big shop of horrors as well.
Well, it's torture.
Yeah, I mean,
It's tantamount to torture. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It just made sense to me, like I said at one point, to just stop eating it all because I didn't need it.
Yeah.
And it was really done very infrequently. But when somebody asked me the question of why do you eat that slice of cheese when it doesn't do much for you, I'd say, well, what it does is it tastes good, so it makes me feel good, but it wasn't worth the price, if you will.
Eating for pleasure is a lot of times a mistake. You got to eat for, this is what I learned from people like you have taught me that it's better to have an ethical, outlook. I mean, look, you wrote another book called The Emotional Lives of Animals, and this has been widely praised for its groundbreaking research on animal behavior and emotions. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I can tell you a lot, probably more than you want to hear, but just today, literally a half hour ago, I mean, literally, the book's going to press, the second and revised edition. So it's probably half again as big with hundreds of new references. But no, I appreciate your question. I mean, in some ways, the first edition established, if you will, the credibility of studying animal emotions. I'm not the first person who wrote about them. I mean, Charles Darwin did, among others. But it really established a paradigm of valuing individual animals. There's a number of things on the list, treating them, each individual, with compassion, valuing them for being alive, which is their intrinsic or inherent value, rather than valuing them for what they can do for you, which is, people call it the instrumental value. Like, you're valuable, Chris, to me only if you can do something for me, rather than you're valuable just because you.
How dare you,
Because
Mark?
you're alive. Yeah, right. but because you're alive.
Yeah.
So when I wrote that book, I mean, it's just interesting because I finished it in 2006, 17 years ago. And just a year or so ago, my publisher said, we'd like you to do an updated second edition. We're sure it'll sell. The first one sold a lot. And it turns out that, I said, well, what do I have to do? I've read some second editions, which aren't very good. And I don't mean that the people aren't good, but they just sort of changed, some sentences or added a little. And the Library of Congress in America, United States, says that a legitimate second edition has to be 20% different. So not very much. But, it still is. If the original text was 60,000 words, then, I would have to add, give or take, 12,000, right? But it's much longer. It's almost twice as long now, the new edition, and we're going to keep it that way. And I added hundreds, I think 280 or so new references.
Has much changed since the original publication?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of new information, but that's the other reason I decided to revise it is, and I have the whole end of the book deals with generally with that question. Yeah, we've learned a lot new, but like you said before, we haven't learned anything that would make anybody think that non-human animals are dumber than we thought they were 20 years ago, or non-sentient, non-feeling. But that's the whole, or a chunk of the last chapter deals with that, is we don't need any more science to treat animals better. We've had enough science for a century to know that they're sentient feeling beings and we shouldn't be killing them. This second edition is stronger in, I guess that's a good word. It's stronger. It's really a paradigm shift, saying, no, we got to cut back on the talk. We need to act. We need action.
Yeah.
So some people said, oh, well, that's just really radical. And I went, in all honesty, I didn't say it to them, but I said, if you think this is radical, why would you think it's radical? We knew 50 years ago that so-called food animals were highly emotional and suffered in the slaughterhouse brigade, if you will. So I do appreciate your question. There's a lot new, but nothing we've learned means that animals aren't as smart or they're less sentient than we thought they were. And that's a major theme throughout the book, is that we've learned. The research that's been done has taught us that it's more criminal, if you will, to harm the animals, and it should be easier for people who wondered whether animals liked being having stuck needles in them, or being raised without a mother, or raised in social isolation, or being mutilated for food, whether they were really suffering.
Do you think?
Yeah.
I would say, is there problems with certain people in the world? Because guys like us, we can kind of take it on and realize that we empathize kind of immediately, while other people, they never kind of get the message no matter what. Is there a spectrum of empathy out there in the world?
Yeah, I think there is. I think that it's a very diverse phenotype, we would call it, a very diverse emotion, that some people are more feeling, if you will, or more empathic than others. Yeah. And I know that's been shown in research. And that's another reason why I always say it's what these non-humans are feeling, not what they're thinking. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't mean that if you're not as smart as me, you suffer less than me, or if I'm smarter than you, I suffer more, which is a very important thing, because Jeremy Bentham, a philosopher a couple of 100 years ago, said, it's not if they can reason or if they can talk, it's can they suffer.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, as far as something like a spider, who they would say doesn't feel pain necessarily, but he has reflexes to pull away from stuff and get himself out of danger and stuff. Can't we extend the same kind of empathy towards that, even if they don't feel the traditional type of pain?
Yeah, you can say that. And also people say, well, dogs or cats or elephants or rats or mice or penguins don't have emotions and feelings because they're not like ours. But mine aren't necessarily like yours. But it doesn't mean I have them and you don't, or vice versa. So when you accept the fact that it's sentience, the ability to feel, the ability, the possession of a wide spectrum of, if you will, positive, maybe neutral and negative emotions, that once again, we've known this forever. And so when I write, I keep track of that. And I've told people that if I have a little checklist of what we learned could benefit animals, what we learned is not that important to them, so we could mistreat them, say.
Yeah.
The right column is blank. And once again, there's something called the 5 freedoms. The 5 freedoms were put forth in the United Kingdom to protect food animals in 1965. And so that was a recognition of the fact that other animals, in this case food animals, are sentient beings. They shouldn't be harmed. We shouldn't be causing them any more suffering than they might incur in their natural life. Mm-hmm. And once again, we knew that. And so if somebody wants to know how what we know is used or should be used. I do pick the five freedoms because they were one of the first, if not the first, real outline of what animals need. And I mean, and you look back at them now, they need to be able to move around. They need to be able to perform species-specific behavior. They need adequate food and water, et cetera, et cetera. Well, of course they do. So some people just say, well, they did nothing. I don't think they did nothing. Were they enough? No, not even close. But this was 60-something years, 62 years ago or something like that. So it showed back then that people knew that these food animals in industrial agriculture were suffering and needed better lives.
Yeah. And thank God somebody did. But at the same time, we still kill them at the end. We treat them better and better, but still.
Yes, and that's another thing that I write about. Some just saying, we got to take killing off the table.
Yeah.
That killing's no longer an option.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my view in the field of compassionate conservation, about which I write in this book, that if you've got a problem out there, you need to solve it without killing another individual.
Yeah. I heard somebody tell me recently that cows deserve to die basically because they're not smart enough, because we've been to the moon and he's never seen any cows on the moon. So that means we're smarter. But it's like, dogs have this amazing sense of smell. Octopuses can change colors. It's an egocentric sort of comparison to make, where it's so egocentric, assumption that we're somehow better than the animals. Is this not arbitrary and completely made up?
Oh, it is. And so, right. I mean, humans develop these pyramids, where they'll have humans on top, above and separate from, say, the great apes. And then the great apes and humans above and separate from, say, dogs and cats and foxes and wolves and penguins and other animals. Number one, those hierarchies, these pyramids, are just science fiction at best. and number two, higher doesn't mean, I mean, I don't use the words higher or lower, but just because you're above doesn't mean you suffer more. Your pain is your pain, my pain is my pain. So these hierarchies in which humans are placed above and separate from non-humans is what we call speciesism. And it means that we're recognizing individuals of species by having certain cognitive skills or being highly sentient, for example. But it doesn't really matter in the end. Once again, how smart they are, what matters is, can they feel? Do they have subjective experiences, positive as well as negative, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's quite clear that they do, because we're made from the same kind of material, our brains and spinal cords. And
right.
It's just a good assumption. We don't need too much scientific testing. We can pretty much say, in that way, if you're going to eat animals, you might as well eat humans too. There's plenty of them. That's what I say. Just kidding, everybody. Just kidding. But on an ethical point, right, isn't that philosophically correct?
Oh, no, absolutely. No, you're 100% right. And that's why the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals really calls the question on those things in a nice way. I don't believe you should be in other people's faces, but in a nice way. It's about time we use what we know on behalf of other animals.
Yeah.
And I'll have people call me and say, "Well, you made this comment. Where are the data?" And sometimes, I mean, most of the time there are data, but sometimes there's not. And I'll say, "Well, it's common sense."
Yeah.
We, like you said, we have the same neurons, the same, basically, the same cells in our body, the same neurons, the same neurotransmitters. And so,
I mean, do you think it's
Yeah.
like cognitive dissonance, or is it total ignorance, or is it like people deep down? I think they do know, but they try to mask it as much as they can so they don't have to change their habits.
yeah, that's a great question too, Chris. Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think anybody's ever studied it, but we're always good at making excuses for what we do, and so it could be one of the other, or a little bit of both. You know, I did not know that fishes, for example, or birds, I'll leave the mammals out now, could really have this feeling, or, you know, that could solve a problem, which, like I said, didn't really matter. So, you know, as we learn this, we're compelled, I think, to use it on their behalf, to use what we know. And in our book, The Animal's Agenda, Jessica Pierce and I wrote about what we call the knowledge translation gap, because there's a big lag between what we know and the rules and regulations we write, for example. There's a big gap, and the enforcement, which usually misserves the animals. I mean, it just does. I mean, they're the ones, you know. Yeah, and it's so funny that we're talking about this, because just yesterday I was out on a bike ride and I was trying to think. I knew that the final proofs for my book were coming today. And I was just trying to think of something strong, but not so strong to drive people away. And I said, I said, I do get cranky, and I'm sick and tired of people saying, oh, wow, we now know this and we have to treat animals better. Well, we've known this, or a similar fact, for years. So I called what some people were doing, forming platitudes of pain, meaning, you know, we just write it off. We're doing the best we can because the law says we're allowed to do something. Or some people will say, well, no, we know that dogs, because I study dogs, that don't feel or do this. And I'm going, really? I was at the dog park this morning and I must have seen 20 examples of it. So I think you can resolve your cognitive dissonance by denying what we know, or you can honestly not know it. But then when somebody tells you something about, say, an individual of a given species, you don't go, oh, that's interesting. You actually change your way. And that's the action, is you change your way in an active way.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's so hard for people, you know. There's trendsetters and then there's the trend followers, and it takes a long time to get people on board with any kind of change. It's terrible. So look, you also wrote a book called The Animal Manifesto. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, that. You know, I mean, the overarching theme of all my books, I suppose, if I had to capsule it, was how to have more respect and compassion and treat animals with more dignity, you know, and their homes, you know, and the land on which they live, or the tree in which they live, or the water, you know, within which they live. So the Animal Manifesto had 6 reasons, and to be honest with you, I don't have the book here and I don't remember them, but it was 6 reasons to treat animals with more dignity and more respect.
Yeah.
And probably buried in what we've been talking about are the 6 reasons. They're alive, they're sentient beings, they want to live, they've evolved all types of behavioral patterns and strategies to live, if you will.
Yeah. One of the other tragic arguments that I keep hearing from people that aren't too bright is, you know, bees are going to get wiped out, and if we lose all the bees, then we'll lose our food and we will cease to exist. And they give this thing, survival of the fittest. They like to quote me Darwin by saying survival of the fittest. But Darwin also wrote that we had all these species of plants, animals, fungi, insects, all living in symbiotic harmony, depending on each other for existence. How do you get through to somebody like that? It's just so frustrating, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. My goal when I write or talk to people is just to put it out. You know what I mean? I'm going to put the information out. I'm not going to twist arms. I'm not going to get into debates, especially with people who are wasting my time and energy, because they're not going to change and I'm not going to change, to be fair. So if I say to somebody, we just got to close down slaughterhouses, stop eating fishes, birds, just stop eating non-human animals, I don't want to hear the reasons why they do it. Especially when they're not hearing what I say. So I really think that in a very practical sense, since time and energy and money are limited, if you're not going to change and I'm not going to change, good. I hope you have a good life. I do, but I have nothing to talk to you about anymore.
You're more kind than I am, Mark.
Well, I really realize that, that there's no downside to being kind. And every now and again, somebody will surprise me, maybe, and change their ways. But I think the most important thing is like what we're talking about now: doing webinars, writing books, writing papers, talking to the non-converted.
Right.
It's great to put a feather in your cap. And people say if I talk to people who agree with me, then nothing gets done. I don't believe that's true either, because you could be teaching them something, new facts, new ideas.
Right.
But ultimately, for me, I want to see what I say taken seriously. You don't have to, in the end, accept it, but I want to see it taken seriously, and I want to see people doing whatever they can. One of Jane Goodall's star among the millions of, really things you would put a star next to is every individual matters, that every individual can make a difference. And it's true. And people will go, well, that's so lofty. Oh, really? Yeah, I can. I mean, they can. I really believe that everybody can make a difference when they commit themselves to it.
It's a lot like a drop of water on a stone. Eventually, you're going to make the change that you want to see, but persistence and patience. Well, I appreciate that, because I'm glad I talked to you today, because I needed all the hope that I could get. But speaking of Jane Goodall, so you've actually worked with the legendary primatologist on several projects. What was it like hanging out with the legendary, awesome Jane Goodall?
It's wonderful. I mean, she was actually just in Denver a few months ago, so we spent a good deal of time together. I mean, she's a wonderful woman. She is who you see. There's no hidden Jane, if you will. I mean, there really isn't. And I love, her values. Everybody makes a difference. The life of every individual matters. That we need to take care of non-humans, humans, and their homes. When she started studying chimpanzees in 1960, God, that would be like 63 years ago, around the Gombe National Reserve, where she was studying, all the mountains were very heavily forested. There's pictures of her, going through the bush, trying to find chimpanzees. Now in some places, there's no trees. I mean, it's a before and after that will blow your mind. And if it doesn't blow your mind, I mean, there's something wrong. I really believe that.
Yeah.
And she's a great hard worker. She turns 90 next April, and she's still traveling. She's an amazing woman.
She's one of our best most prized environmentalists, for the animals. And
Absolutely.
I can't tell you, I grew up with her as the earliest age, and she just reminds me of, some older people in my family who were also into nature, and put me on the course I'm on today. PBS, baby, PBS.
Yeah.
Nova, nature, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yep. No, very influential, and on the ground, she argued and that we need to name animals, not number them, that we need to acknowledge their individual personalities and temperament.
Yeah.
And when she left the field to go back and work on her dissertation, the two things that some of her scientific colleagues said is we don't name animals, we number them, and we don't talk about personalities. And that's vastly changed now. If there's somebody out there who argues we shouldn't name animals or that they're all the same, then they're not worth talking to, because they're totally out of touch with the amazing amount of research in the area of cognitive ethology, the study of animal minds and brains, and how the brains work to produce adaptive behavior.
Wasn't it true that they got chimpanzees in a lab setting, pulled them out of the nature, dressed them up in human clothes, and tried to make them use silverware and stuff, and they didn't get the response they wanted, and so they called them stupid, right?
Yeah, and that's the other thing I write about in the Dogs Demystified, as well as in the Emotional Lives of Animals and the Animal Manifesto, is we're not the standard. A lot of animals do things we can't do, so that we call ourselves stupid. So it calls for people to pay attention to who the animal is and what they need to do to be a card-carrying member of their species. So we don't need the keen nose of a dog. We don't communicate with one another using ultrasound like bats might, bouncing something off like radar.
Yeah.
So we really need to be careful of saying other animals are smart, and they may not understand the language you're speaking, but it doesn't mean they're dumb. It just, if you spoke some language to me I didn't know, I would just be lost, and so are they. But the knowledge translation gap really argues we need to know we need to use what we know on behalf of other animals. And we've known enough for decades to basically shut down all research if we wanted to, or if it were possible.
Yeah. I hope we get there. I hope that we can somehow, maybe technology will allow us to see inside the minds of chickens, and they will be screaming, "Oh my God, what are you doing to my family?" And maybe we'll wake up then. Or...
Yeah, it's possible. All these things are possible. I don't think they're going to be yelling in English or any language we know, but when you have them in captivity, they're there 24/7, and it would be really good to study them.
Yeah.
To see exactly what's going on. And I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic there will be some changes, or else we're doomed. We really are.
Well, I'm on the fence. I think maybe we're doomed, but at the same time, veganism's growing every day. Every day we're getting a little bit more people looking at these videos and stuff. So we're making progress. I would definitely say that. But are we going to make it in time? That's the real question.
Well, it's hard to know, because a lot of people don't realize the immediacy of the situation. They can't think a year ahead, no less 15, 20 years ahead. This planet's going to be vastly different. And I don't want to say different means worse. I think in many cases it will be, on the health side of things, on resources. I just got the biannual twice a year bill for my car insurance, and it's gone up drastically. And I can afford it, but it's gone up drastically. It's because of supply. It's because it now costs more to get a car fixed. So therefore, to insure yourself, they need to make sure they have the base amount of money so they can give a client, if you will, what they need to fix their car. It's amazing how much it's gone up.
Yeah. I mean, since
Costing.
1970, the price of houses and cars has gone up about 900%. So times are a-changing.
Ooh. Wow. Yeah, that is...
Startling number, isn't it? And this is a good time to give a shout out to all the animal rights organizations who are doing absolutely radical and fantastic stuff. Is there anything you want to add before we go? I mean, what projects you're working on, or a message for the young people? What do you got to say before we go, Marc?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like to recall a few things. The first is, of course, that every individual can make a difference. People go, oh, the problems are so big, and I live in Boulder, or I live in your little town, or I live in the country, and everybody can make a difference. Every individual matters, and I'm not saying that disingenuously. Act locally, think globally. A lot of people want to go off to these great places, and I mean, I have too, but there's a lot of house cleaning that needs to occur locally. So think of what you would like to do globally and start locally, and in some ways, fix your hometown, fix your home community. Every individual matters. Be polite to other people. I mean, I really feel that way. I developed what I call the 13 Ps from my book, Rewilding Our Hearts. And some of the Ps were like, be patient, be polite, be proactive, be passionate, be proud. But something that came to me some years ago, and I hadn't thought about it. I mean, I've thought about it recently, but one way to capsule a lot of what I'm saying is you're working for the animals. I always put working caps for the animals. You shouldn't be working against people. It's a waste of time. I really feel that way. I mean, if you get the feeling that someone isn't going to change their ways to be more friendly, I don't mean necessarily to be compatible with yours, but necessarily to be, or not necessarily to please you, just be sincere and just say, look, this is where we're going. The numbers are not promising in terms of climate change, change in water and air temperature, the loss of habitable land, the loss of land due to the production of food. And then people go, well, you're so negative. You can't see the positive side of things. I'm really not a negative person. The reality, the numbers show that this alarmist attitude about where we'll be in 50 years, just pick a round figure, is scary.
It's real.
I mean, it really is real. And so will we be able to adapt, say, as a species? Yeah, I'm sure we will be, but I'm not sure I would say that the future will be better.
Yeah, and that's the optimistic take. I'm over here saying we got till about 2050 before we descend into cannibalism. We'll see. But work for the animals. I think this is the greatest thing. It makes me feel I should probably drop the podcast, stop trying to educate people on the subject, and go out and help some donkeys and some, stuff like that.
Well, I agree with you. I think action on the ground is important, but maybe you can do both. Because I think what you're doing too is you're reaching an audience. In some ways you have no idea who's listening.
Sure.
And I really feel, like I said before, talking to people who don't live and drink and eat this kind of stuff, it's important to get to them and explain to them nicely that what they're doing is harmful. And, I've gotten into arguments with people who have young kids. And I said, if you're not working your tail off for the well-being of the planet, if you will, then why did you have kids? And a lot of people get very reflective about it, and one person got really defensive and said, "Don't tell me that I shouldn't have kids." And I said, "I never said that." I know I was almost concerned for my safety because, but the fact of the matter is that's not what I was saying. I said, "You've got kids, and you grew up in a nice area. They're being raised, in a nice area. But think of all the youngsters who aren't,
Yeah.
who need help." Yeah.
Yeah. Empathy, people, goes a long way.
It really does. It's amazing if you can allow yourself to feel the I don't want to say the pains and the suffering, the joy too.
Right. Yeah.
Of other individuals. But if someone's having a really good time, you might not feel they need to be rescued. If somebody's walking around in a cage or being tortured in research or for food or entertainment, then getting involved is critical because you can change these people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It started with me, and eventually you can get through. So that's hopeful. I appreciate that.
Don't lose hope, and I really mean it. If you lose hope, you're done. I really feel that way.
All right.
I've talked to youngsters about this, and I always paint a positive picture, but not a false picture.
That's good.
Some years ago, a young girl said to me, "I'm tired of people coming in and telling us how bad things are and how we really can't make things better." And she actually was very wise for her 8 or 10 years on the planet. And she said, "So why should I do anything? What do you think?" And I said, "I think the opposite. I think get involved, make a difference. Oh, but I'm just one person." If everybody got involved and did something and didn't wonder whether they were making a difference, things would get better. Are they going to get better to the point of overcoming what a lot of people fear in the future? Well, I think so, but it may not be as rosy.
Sure.
That's all.
What other choice do you have, I guess? Is nihilism or,
Yeah.
Do you want to live or don't you?
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, you're 100% right. And I try to teach them to think community-wide. I really like that. Think of your friends, your family. Extend that to maybe people who live near you, and then extend it across the world.
Yeah.
I think that if we work across the world, we can come up with what I've called years ago, like an umbrella of compassion, an umbrella of coexistence. And I think, well, thanks. I mean, because that's really what we're talking about, that we need to span cultures, span, if you will, geographical space. But start at home. Take care of your garden, take care of the animals in your garden, or whoever you are interested in saving or whose lives you want to enrich and prevent suffering. And I find that works. I think it's not disingenuously empowering them. It's really showing them that they have far more power than they think they have. Because they're always told, "Oh, you're just one little person in a little town." Well, that's where it all begins.
Yeah. Yeah. You're already strong enough to make a difference. Just remember that, people. But it takes persistence, and a drop of water on a stone over many, many years can leave an imprint. So that's a good message. All right, we'll leave it off. Let's talk after this. We'll sign off to the people in TV land, and we'll chat backstage here. All right. Marc Bekoff, wonderful human being, hell of a guy. Rewilding Our Hearts, The Animal Manifesto, The Emotional Lives of Animals. Look up all of his books. There'll be plenty in the description. And go vegan, people. It's not hard. It's good for you, good for the environment, and good for the animals. It's sort of a no-brainer. So, and do that. And we'll have Marc back again, and we'll hopefully talk about more about how we're going to solve this crisis. Thanks, everybody. See ya.